4.3.11. Productivity, thermal stratification, nutrient mixing, and nutrient loading. Rates of productivity are higher in shallow areas where sunlight can penetrate to the seabed, and in areas where there are more nutrients, such as estuaries, and where there are upwelling currents. Okay, so productivity, how much life is there in the water, is dependent on how deep the sunlight can come into the water, because of course sunlight is needed for photosynthesis in the phytoplankton, and in the macrophytes also depend on that. So how deep into the water can the sunlight penetrate? Are there nutrients that the plants need and the animals that live there? Okay, but particularly the producers, they need iron. They need, different, the little plankton need different types of minerals and nutrients, phosphorus, nitrogen, etc. And upwelling currents, that's where, when the air pushes the surface water away, and so then you have the deep, saline, cold, nutrient-rich water is able to come up. Okay, so it's because so productivity is higher where there's upwelling, because the upwelling brings the nutrients with it. So some coastal areas may also benefit from nutrients carried offshore by rivers and overland flow. So nutrients can come to these shallow areas through upwelling processes, or the surface areas through upwelling, or it can also come down the rivers and into the bays, right? Variations in productivity can also be seen in some lake systems. Ocean productivity largely refers to the production of organic matter by phytoplankton. Remember those small microscopic plant thingies? Phytoplankton are photoautotrophs. Well, autotrophs means self-feeding. Photo is related to light. They convert sunlit energy into food energy. Sunlight is the main energy source for almost all life on Earth, including that found in the deep ocean. However, in the ocean, light is absorbed and scattered, so very little of it penetrates below a depth of about 80 meters. Penetration can occur at depths of about 150 meters in the least productive subtropical regions, and as shallow as 10 meters in highly productive coastal regions. Okay, so why does the sunlight have a harder time getting in through more productive areas? Well, more productive means there's more phytoplankton. Okay, so the water is really full of all this stuff. It's dark. It's full of nutrients, it's full of phytoplankton, it's full of zooplankton, it's full of fish. There's stuff in it, so the light has a harder time getting through. And photosynthesis is largely restricted to the upper light-penetrated layer of the ocean, which is called the photic zone. So the highest productivity tends to occur near coastlines or in shallow seas where upwellings and nutrient enrichment of surface waters occurs. Okay, we have figure 4.60, variation in temperature, nutrient availability, chlorophyll, and organic carbon with depth. In low and mid-latitude oceans, the absorption, so remember latitude is where you're at on the planet, okay? The absorption of sunlight causes surface water to be much warmer and less dense than water in the deep ocean. Warm water is more buoyant, floaty, than cold, which causes the upper sunlit layer to float on the denser, deeper ocean water. Okay, so cold saline water sinks. The transition between the two is known as the thermocline. Remember, we covered that in 4.1. Okay, so the zone between the warm mixed layer and the cold stratified layer, that zone, that's called the thermocline. Winds may mix water across the thermocline, thus some water from the photic zone may transfer some nutrients to the deep ocean. This combined effect of light on photosynthesis and seawater density is critical for the success of ocean phytoplankton. The deep chlorophyll maximum, DCM, deep chlorophyll maximum, occurs where there is adequate light for photosynthesis and significant nutrient supply from below. Okay, so the nutrients are often coming from below, but the light is coming from above. The existence of a thin, buoyant, that means floaty, buoyant surface leads to nutrient limitation on ocean productivity. Dead organic matter sinks to the ocean floor, taking with it its surface nutrients, causing the nutrients to accumulate, that means to build up, in deep waters where there is no light available for photosynthesis. Right? So you have this kind of this problem here, where heavy things sink. Due to differences in density between surface water and the deep sea water, dissolved nutrients can only be returned to the surface very slowly or where there are upwelling currents. By driving nutrients out of the sunlit, buoyant surface waters, ocean productivity limits itself. Okay, so this is an ocean stays in balance here a bit, whereas so that you don't always have sun. If you had sunlight and lots of nutrients in the same areas all the time and it never changed, like the productivity would explode, and then it would be too much, right? And that would use up all of the oxygen in the water, and which would kill things off then, and you would have this kind of boom and bust cycle. So the ocean has these balances built in where nutrients kind of sink, and only occasionally or through special forces like upwelling does it come up. Okay, and even upwelling, that depends on the wind, right? So it's not a constant thing. 4.3.12 Assessment of fish stocks and monitoring of harvest rates. Accurate assessment means kind of like measurement and judgment of fish stocks. And here we're talking about stocks is like the amount of fish in a particular area. Accurate assessment of how much fish is in a place, and monitoring of harvest rates, how much we take out due to fishing, are required for their conservation and sustainable use. Okay, so we need to know how much fish we have in an area and how much we're taking out if we're going to be able to figure out a good balance there so that we're not taking too much. Okay. Scientists collect several types of data to estimate the size and health of fish populations being exploited. The ones that we're fishing, or the ones that are affected by our fishing. The age and size of the fish populations being caught is an example of such a data. This is called catch data. Catch data is one of the most widely used methods and includes the weight and species caught by commercial and recreational fisher folk. Recreational means doing it for fun, which can then be used to estimate the size and distribution of the fish population. So they count the size and age and whatnot, and species, the weight of what's being caught, and they extrapolate from there to how much must be there. The results of scientific surveys carried out from research vessels. Okay, so there's boats that are specifically out there to take data on fish populations. That's another way. And information from tag and recapture surveys. Okay, where you collect fish, you tag them, and you release them again, and you see where they go. Okay, so these are some different methods for collecting data. Harvest rates can be monitored through the study of fish logbooks. Logbooks are records. Logbooks have data on the size of the catch, the species caught, the equipment used, and area where the fish were caught. Data from UK, United Kingdom vessels, has to be handed in within 48 hours of landing at a port. So if you're a fisher folk, there's some paperwork you got to do. You got to monitor exactly what you're getting, and you have to report that to the port authorities. This allows government officials to monitor harvest rates over time. However, it does not monitor illegal fishing. All right, so we don't know if you're not doing your logbooks, you're not handing things in, you're just out there in your sketchy boat doing what you shouldn't be doing. Well, we don't have records of that. In 1996, the FAO introduced the stock status plot. That's this figure. It's figure 4.62. For about 400 well-studied fisheries, researchers analyzed long-term trends in catches and assigned different terms such as developing, where catches were increasing, and senescent, which means aging, where the catch had collapsed. The FAO found that the number of collapsed stocks, so that means fish populations that don't exist anymore or are super tiny now when they used to be big. So the number of collapsed stocks had steadily increased over time. And by the mid-1990s, 20% of the stocks exploited in the 1950s had collapsed. So those fish populations no longer exist. Or maybe there's a few individuals left, but nothing worth fishing. It's very difficult to predict the future size of fish stocks because many factors affect fishing, such as changes in government policy, rising energy costs, market crashes, they're talking about the stock market, natural disasters, global warming, ocean acidification, and changes in demand. How much fish people want to eat, and which one they want to eat. Nevertheless, catch data are important for estimating the size and health of fish stocks. However, expert stock assessments, here again we're talking about fish populations, can be very costly, especially if using research vessels. By vessels they mean big boats. National governments could collect data on the number of fish caught, their economic value, and the cost of fishing to ascertain the feasibility of their fishing industry. One estimate in Nature, that's a scientific publication, 2013, suggested that catches that are underreported by about 100 to 500% in many low-income countries and middle-income countries, and by 30 to 50% in high-income countries. Oops. So people are not reporting what they're catching. So that means their data is maybe not very accurate. On the other hand, the number of fish caught does not necessarily reflect the number of fish in the ocean. By the mid-2000s, 14% of the 166 stocks analyzed had collapsed. You can see this in figure 4.63, the canary rockfish. In many cases, when fishing restrictions were introduced, stocks began to stabilize or even rebuild. Okay, so when we started legislating saying, okay, you can't fish between certain times, you can't fish more than a certain amount, that kind of restrictions that helped these populations of fish stabilize and maybe even replenish. Along the east coast of the USA, the abundance of haddock and redfish increased more than 5-fold between 1995 and 2007 due to the stricter fishing regulations. So that's good news. Smaller catches compared to previous larger catches does not necessarily mean that there are fewer fish. For example, 34 fish stocks on the west coast of the USA would appear to have collapsed based on falling catches. Okay, so that falling catches. Well, like they mean like that the people are reporting fishing way less. So the fisher folk have caught way less, and they're reporting lower numbers of caught fish. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's because there aren't due to lack of fish. It could be something else. Okay, so it would have appeared that that all 34 were collapsing, whereas only 3 had actually collapsed: anchovies, candlefish, and abalone. Instead, catches fell due to changes in markets and new fishing regulations, so had to do with economic and political factors, not due to the actual fish numbers. Catches of sharks may appear to have fallen partly because of the sharks have been reclassified into new groups. Okay, so that can also be like, well, maybe, this group of sharks we're catching less of them because they're being counted differently. So just kind of like a administrative difference can lead to the appearance of falling numbers. Catch data can also be affected by changes in the size of exclusive economic zones, disasters such as oil spills, increased fuel costs, can't afford to go out with the boat very often, and low fish prices, less an economic incentive to go fishing. Most countries only monitor their largest or most economic 4.3.13 risks of fishing at the MSY, the maximum sustainable yield. There are risks in harvesting fish at MSY levels, and these risks need to be managed carefully. MSY is only an estimated value. Okay, it's approximate. And attempting to harvest at exactly that rate will inevitably be inaccurate. Exceeding the rate and going beyond it may lead to reduction in reproductive potential, less fish babies, less new fish, and positive feedback causing rapid decline in fish stocks. MSY is the largest annual harvest that a fish stock can produce on a long-term scale. MSY is the largest annual harvest that a fish stock can produce on a long-term scale. It is a harvesting model that can be used to calculate how much fish can be taken from a stock without depleting it. However, it is very difficult to calculate MSY because it is affected by several factors. At best, it should be seen as an estimate. Figure 4.64 here, maximum sustainable yield. This looks at that. Biomass refers to the total weight of a stock. It varies with growth, as the fish get bigger and older, reproduction, how many new fish there are, and mortality, how many fish die. Some species, such as cod, grow quickly, whereas others, such as herring, grow slowly. Some species, such as cod and herring, produce many offspring each year, whereas others, such as sharks, do not. Some species, such as sand eels, are short-lived and highly reproductive. So they don't live very long, and they have lots of babies. While others, such as cod, have a more stable stock size. For fished populations, the number of fish that are caught or killed by fishing activities, there's ghost fishing and bycatch and all other reasons that they could die, affects the size of the total biomass of the stock. As large numbers of fish are removed from the population, the reproductive potential decreases and eventually the population decreases in size. The calculation of MSY for a single fish stock must consider many factors: how quickly the fish grow, when the fish reproduce, the death rate of the fish, changes in abiotic factors such as water temperature, salinity, oxygen, or acidification, changes in biotic factors such as the predator-prey relationships and parasites, other types of illnesses, and the method of fishing used. According to Peter Larkin, in 1977, in the document An Epitaph for the Concept of Maximum Sustainable Yield, MSY puts populations at risk because, so this is a criticism of this method of using MSY to know how much fish we can fish. Here's the criticism. It does not consider spatial variations in productivity. Okay, so it doesn't consider like where the fish are necessarily in the stock in a particular region. Okay, it does not consider non-target species. Okay, so we don't take into consideration how much fishing of this cod affects other species, or how much those other species affect how much cod there is, and so on. Only considers the benefits of fishing and ignores the costs, and is open to political manipulation, corruption. In addition, MSY stands to assume that all individuals in a population are identical, right? We're just talking about the biomass of the fish, and then in that case, one fish is the same as another fish. But they're not, right? Because some individuals have maybe more reproductive success than others. Some produce lots of eggs, some produce only a few. Some are, this, that, or the other, stronger or weaker, or have adaptations that can help the community through evolution. So each individual is different, and MSY does not take that into consideration. Calculations of MSY involve the assumption that the annual harvest will be the same year after year. However, this is not always the case, as harvests are dynamic, means they change, and experience natural fluctuations and changes due to anthropogenic activities, so things that humans are doing and things about our lives. We're not always out there fishing at the same time every year. Consequently, some scientists interpret MSY as a maximum average yield that can also show fluctuations. So it's not necessarily a set number, but it can move around a bit. An example of the misunderstanding of fish stocks involves the orange ruffy fishery in New Zealand. It was believed that orange ruffy, it's a type of fish, had a short lifespan but bred quickly, and so it was fished widely. It was later found that orange ruffies lived lengthy lives, about 30 years, and bred slowly, so the stocks were largely depleted. So mistakes in MSY can be catastrophic if we don't understand the fish as well as we think we do. We have to research the fish. In many parts of the world, such as the Northwest Atlantic, the North Sea, and in Peru's anchovy industry and whale fisheries, overfishing has devastated large fish stocks. As fishing depletes the oceans of large, long-lived predators, such as cod and tuna, fishing fleets move down the food chain to fish for smaller, shorter-lived species that are of less economic value. Critics argue that fishing according to the principles of MSY is difficult in practice. Estimates of MSY may be based on unreliable data, like that orange ruffy example. For example, biologists may have insufficient data to accurately estimate population size and/or growth rates. 4.3.14, recovery of overexploited fish species. We're going to read about some good news, maybe. There are many stakeholders in the fishing industry, including governments, consumers, non-governmental organizations, also called NGOs, and retailers such as fish markets and supermarkets. Okay, so stakeholders is everyone with an interest, everyone who has something to gain or lose from the industry. Governments are generally keen to keep people employed in the fishing industry. Okay, so from a political perspective, the government is interested in what's going on with fishing because it's jobs, right? As it makes money for the country, may provide tax revenues, and keeps people employed. Therefore, maintaining a healthy and sizable fish population is in their best interests. Similarly, the fishing industry would prefer a large fish population, right? So both the fisher folks and the governments want there to be lots of fish. We don't want fish populations collapsing. That's bad. However, many in the industry are out to make a profit and will try to maximize their catch sizes. Tragedy of the commons. If the catch size goes down, they will often move to other fishing grounds, including overseas. It means to a different country. Consumers generally want fish to be available in the shops and markets at affordable prices. No one wants to try to buy salmon for 600 crowns a kilo. This will encourage large-scale fishing as this can keep prices low. So as long as the supply is high, the prices stay low. Salmon's maybe not an example considering most of it's raised in aquaculture. It may also, that's the next slide. It may also encourage aquaculture, especially species such as salmon. NGOs, especially environmental NGOs, are more likely to want to protect fish stocks and to keep fishing within sustainable limits. So, organizations that's their mission, right? They're not out to make a profit. Their mission is to protect the fish. They may also call for bans on certain fishing practices, such as the fishing of young fish or endangered species. Retailers, the sellers of fish, require a secure and sufficient supply of fish so they can continue to sell them throughout the year. They also want fish to be available at affordable prices. Differences are generally managed, if at all, through discussions and negotiations. So differences in opinion, these kind of tensions in perspectives. There can also be bans on certain species being fished and on when fishing can take place. Regulation. Certain areas may be closed to fishing vessels either seasonally or permanently. Fines can be given to vessels that break the law. Species that have been overexploited may recover with cooperation between governments, the fishing industry, consumers, and other interest groups, including NGOs, wholesale fishery markets, and local supermarkets. So there's a lot of people involved in bringing the fish back to an area. They all have to kind of agree on how they're going to go about this. Measures that help to restore stocks include temporary fishing bans, limits to fishing licenses, the permission to go out and fish, prevention of bycatch, using strategies to only catch that which you're actually aiming for and not other things, and information being provided to help consumers choose species that are not being harvested unsustainably, like those labels that say this comes from a sustainable fishery. In many areas around the world, fish species are overexploited and their numbers are in decline. When a fish stock becomes overfished, some agency must develop a plan to rebuild the stock to a sustainable level. Interested organizations can include national governments, the fishing industry, researchers, scientists, retailers, consumers, environmental organizations, and individuals. Many of these have differing interests, such as increasing employment, or making a profit, or providing a food supply, having access to a varied and healthy diet, and maintaining a healthy ecosystem. Typically, the processes of fish stock rebuilding requires a reduction in fishing, right? You have to slow down or stop the fishing for a while if you want the population to rebuild, so that populations can reach their target level or their MSY. When the numbers have first increased to the overfished level, the fish is removed from the overfished list. However, it remains on the rebuilding list until it has reached its target population. In 2021 in the USA, there were 45 fish stocks with rebuilding plans, but only 6 were no longer overfished. Okay, and then we have an example here about the Skagerrak lobster reserves in Norway. And here is figure 4.65, changes in the size structure of European lobsters in 3 reserves in Norway. Let's read that example. In Skagerrak, southeast Norway, in the early 2000s, numbers of the European lobster reached an all-time low at about 10% of the historical maximum. Ooh. Skagerrak was once characterized by very productive fish and shellfish stocks, but these had become depleted. In 2006, Norway's first lobster reserves were created, with the aim of restoring the population through a ban on fixed gear. So that's a type of lobster fishing gear. Before and after surveys of the lobster population were carried out to investigate the impacts of protection on the depleted population. Okay, so they went out and did some monitoring surveys before they implemented these restrictions, and then again after to see if it made a difference. The capture, release, recapture method was used to measure changes in the size of lobsters and to track their movements. So they captured some lobster, and then they released them again, and then they captured them again to kind of track their size and stuff. Additional surveys were carried out to see the effects of the lobster reserves. And by reserves, they mean like reservations, like areas where you can't fish. And of the ban on fixed gear on other fish species such as cod, trout, and vrase. I'm not sure how you say that. The results showed an increase in population density, abundance, body size, and immigration into surrounding fisheries. So it was a success. The survival rate of large lobsters was noted, and there was a rebuilding of the age and size structure of the lobster population. Body size increased by about 13% in the protected areas compared with control sites. There was also a significant rebuilding of the size structure of the cod population within the protected area. So protecting the area for the lobster also protected the cod. After the initial 6 years of protection, about 5% of lobsters had migrated from protected sites into the surrounding areas. Increasingly, cod populations were immigrating from protected areas. After 16 years of protection, the reduced harvest pressure had had a number of positive effects on many fish populations. So that's interesting. So protecting the lobster had effects on lots of other fish. 4.3.15 Exclusive Economic Zones. According to the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, coastal states, it's countries that have coastlines, that live by the sea, have an exclusive economic zone stretching 370 kilometers out to sea, within which the state's government can regulate fishing. Almost 60% of the ocean is the high seas outside of these coastal zones, with limited intergovernmental regulation. There is an equity and justice issue when countries sell access to their fishing zones rather than managing it for local people. The UN is attempting to develop an international treaty to protect the high seas. An exclusive economic zone, EEZ, is an area of the sea in which a sovereign country has special rights for the exploration and use of the marine resources, such as fish, minerals, and energy resources. It stretches from the outer limit of territorial waters at 12 nautical miles, which is roughly 22.2 kilometers, to 200 nautical miles, which is roughly 370 kilometers, from the coast baseline. You can see that in figure 4.66. In the territorial sea, a country has full sovereign rights over the waters. They get to decide. In an exclusive economic zone, the country has rights below the ocean surface, where there are overlapping claims on the ocean. Any point in the overlapping zone should be within the EEZ of the nearest country. The contiguous zone forms the outer edge of the territorial waters, between 12 nautical miles and 24 nautical miles from the coastline. In contrast, the open oceans, or high seas, fall outside of sovereignty issues and as a common resource can be overexploited without much regulation. Okay, so the high seas don't belong to anybody. Initially, EEZs only extended for 3 nautical miles, but in 1982, the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, declared that EEZs should extend for 200 nautical miles. There have been a number of disputes, conflicts, both past and present, over access to resources in what are now exclusive economic zones. For example, in 1952, Iceland extended its fishing zone to 3 to 4 nautical miles in 1958, to 12 nautical miles in 1976, to 200 nautical miles. Other countries needed Iceland's permission to fish in its waters. There were conflicts known as the Cod Wars between Iceland and the UK over the fishing rights in 1958 to 1961, 1972 to 1973, and 1975 to 1976. In each case, Iceland won the dispute. An agreement in Iceland's favor was finally reached in 1976. As of 2023, current disputes include a section of the Beaufort Sea, which is disputed by Canada and the USA. The area potentially has large reserves for oil. A survey of fishing practices in EEZs found that fleet sizes were only quantified and regulated in 20% of the world's EEZs. So fleet sizes is how many boats and what size they are. Controls on fleet size were more common among high-income than low-income EEZs. Access to foreign fishing is granted in over 50% of all EEZs and is more frequent in low-income than in high-income EEZs. The survey suggested that in 33% of EEZs that are classified as low-income, mostly in Africa and Oceania, most fishing is carried out by foreign fleets from either the European Union, South Korea, Japan, China, or the USA. So the fishing that's being done in the exclusive economic zones of some countries is being done by other countries legally. 4.3.16 Animal Rights and Indigenous Hunters. The harvesting of some species, such as seals, sharks, and whales, is controversial. There are ethical issues regarding biorights, the rights of an endangered species, a unique species, or a landscape to remain unmolested. The rights of indigenous culture and international conservation legislation should also be considered. In the late 1930s, more than 50,000 whales were killed annually. The International Whaling Commission, IWC, was set up to decide on hunting quotas based on the findings of its scientific committee. In 1982, the IWC voted to establish a ban on commercial whaling, which took effect in 1986. Japan wants to lift the ban on stocks that have recovered. However, anti-whaling countries and environmental groups believe that whale species remain vulnerable and that whaling is both immoral and unsustainable. According to the IWC, indigenous subsistence whaling occurs in Greenland, involving the fin, bowhead, humpback, and minke whales. In Siberia, involving the gray and bowhead whales, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, involving the humpback whales, and North America, involving the bowhead and gray whales. And then there are some examples here that you can read about Inuit whaling and the narwhal hunting, as well, and bowheads. And then there's another example about the Faroe Islanders and their capturing of whales and dolphins. So be sure you read a bit of that so that you have a good idea on some examples and think about to what extent our perspective is determined by our membership of a particular culture. That's something to think about when reading through those examples.